Hey folks, it's Doc. So for the next section of virtual time that we're going to be spending together, we're going to focus on Maya Angelou's Why the Caged Bird Sings. So I thought a perfect way to start this section would be to read Sympathy, which is a poem written by Paul Laurence Dunbar in, I believe, 1899. After we finish reading the poem, I think you'll be able to clearly see that Maya Angelou takes the title of her autobiography, Why the Caged Bird Sings, from this poem. So today we're going to focus on determining theme in poetry, so that's RL 8.2. So let's dig right into Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar and talk about theme. So when we talk about how to annotate a poem, we're always going to ask ourselves, does the poem have a narrative structure? If it does, we're going to annotate for setting, main characters, conflict, resolution, and theme. If it does not have a narrative structure, we're going to treat the poem just as though it were an informational text, and we're going to try to figure out what the theme is and how each stanza relates to the theme. And I misspoke, I don't mean theme, but topic rather. So we're going to figure out what the topic is and how each stanza relates to the topic. I'm going to go ahead and, for the sake of time, just tell you I've already read this poem, and it's pretty clear that it's more about addressing a topic than it is about having a narrative structure. So we're going to start by just trying to determine what the topic is and then figure out how each stanza relates to the topic, so we can figure out how the author feels about the topic, which is going to be the kind of lesson we're supposed to learn, or the theme we're supposed to learn. So in this particular poem, if we just look at Sympathy, the title, that's going to primarily be our topic. So the topic is going to be sympathy. And if we didn't know what that was, we could look it up. But sympathy is basically when you try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, or you try to intellectually understand the emotional struggles and pain they're going through. Sympathy is sometimes confused with and also very similar to empathy. Empathy is more like feeling what one goes through, when sympathy is more like trying to intellectually understand it. Great. So now that we know what the topic is, we can take down our genre-based thinking jobs, which is just going to be figure out or take a gist for each stanza and determine how the author feels about the topic. So let's try to figure that out. So sympathy. I know what the caged bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass, when the first bird sings and the first bud opes, and the faint perfume from its chalice steals, I know what the caged bird feels. So we look at this first stanza and we just ask ourselves, how does the author feel about sympathy, or what kind of sympathy is going on? The first thing we notice is that there is an I, so we can jot down that this has a first person point of view. And we can also note that there is an I that's being compared to the caged bird. I know what the caged bird feels. So we can assume that the I is sympathizing with the caged bird. So why does the I sympathize with the caged bird? Both literally, and what is the deeper meaning we can get from this? So in this first stanza, we see that there's juxtaposition, or there's contrast between two things, between really a few things. So the first is the I and the caged bird, but that's not really a contrast because the I understands what the caged bird is going through. The two things that are really juxtaposed is nature and imprisonment. because we get all of this beautiful imagery about, so when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, the wind is stirring, there's spraying grass, there's river flowing like a stream of glass, there's all this stuff. The flowers are opening, the birds outside are taking their drinks from those cups of open flowers that are full of water. And then we get again, I know what the caged bird feels. So while all this beautiful stuff is happening outside, spring is happening, rivers are flowing, flowers are blooming, the bird is caged. So our main juxtaposition again is nature and imprisonment, life, freedom, and restriction, limitation. Those are the things that are being juxtaposed. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why does this I, the speaker of this poem, identify with the caged bird? He knows what the caged bird feels because the caged bird wants to be outside, but he can't because he's imprisoned. So who is this I? Who is this speaker? We ask this question. Let's go to the next stanza. I know why the caged bird beats his wings till its blood is red on the cruel bars, for he must fly back to his perch and cling when he would fain would be on the bough a swing. And the pain still throbs in the old scars, and they pulse again with a keener sting. I know why he beats his wing. So again, we get sympathy. The speaker understands what the bird is going through, and what is the bird going through that he understands? Well, the bird is beating its wings on the cage until they're blood red, because he has to fly back to his perch and cling to his little, stick that's there in the cage when he would rather be outside in nature enjoying life. This is a painful scenario, right? So how does the author feel about the topic? Well, he sympathizes with the bird because he understands the desire to be free. So we can just write down that for our gist. The speaker with the bird, sympathizes with the bird because the bird fights to be free from his cage. And assumably, the speaker is doing the same thing. But we're not exactly sure what kind of cage the speaker is in. It's clear that on a literal level, the bird is a caged bird. It's a bird that's kept as a domestic pet. It's in a cage. But when it looks out the window, it wants to be free, so it beats its wings against the cage bars, and it has to go back to its perch when it would rather be outside. It's fighting. Why is the speaker fighting to be free? What kind of cage is the speaker in? It's really not stated explicitly. We can make some inferences, but let's just keep reading before we do so. So, last stanza. I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and he would be free. It's not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core. But a plea that upward to heaven he flings, I know why the caged bird sings. So again, we get the narrator sympathizing with the caged bird. He understands why the bird sings. And why does the bird sing? It's clear. It's not a carol of joy or glee. This is not a happy song. It's a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core. He wants to be free. So the narrator sympathizes with the singing of the bird. And here is clearly, the title of Maya Angelou's autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which is why we said that this must have been the poem that inspired her to title the book as she did. So what is our theme when in each stanza we see over and over again these motifs of imprisonment juxtaposed to freedom? So let's take down our theme statement. What can we say about this? Whenever there is imprisonment, there will be a struggle for freedom that takes on different forms. We get the struggle of, in the beginning, he knows how the bird feels. It must feel horrible when it looks outside and it sees freedom and it's imprisoned. We know why the caged bird beats its wing while it fights to get free. The bird fights to be free because it wants to be outside. It wants to experience life. And we know finally in the last stanza why the bird sings. The bird doesn't sing a happy song. The bird sings a song of freedom. And this beautiful kind of imagery we get of the confinement of the bird in the cage, and then even the song, the voice that can travel on sound waves and kind of escape the cage, even though the bird itself can't be free. So in terms of a literal meaning of a poem like this, we just see that the narrator or the speaker sympathizes with or understands the pain of the caged bird, because the narrator, like the bird, wants to be free and the narrator is imprisoned. There's a variety of, a poem like this is just kind of open. It can mean a variety of things. There's many different kinds of prisons that exist, prisons of the mind, prisons of the body, etc. This poem can mean multiple things. But if we understand that Paul Laurence Dunbar himself is an African American who is the son of people who were literally enslaved, this poem can clearly have resonance and meaning for African American struggle for liberation. And this last stanza itself, I know why the caged bird sings. It doesn't sing a happy song, it sings a sad song. I mean, we can really, jump to, the end of chapter 2 of Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, where he says, "I've often been utterly astonished since I came to the North to find persons who could speak of the singing among slaves as evidence of their contentment and happiness. It's impossible to conceive of a greater mistake. Slaves sing most when they are most unhappy." And this whole section is about just how, astonished Frederick Douglass is that people are saying that, well, oh, look at the slaves down there in the cotton fields. They're singing these songs. Therefore, they must be happy with their life. He's saying they're not happy with their life at all. They're very much miserable. So that's the way that Paul Laurence Dunbar speaks back to Frederick Douglass in this poem.